I used to believe wedding days were sacred, that no matter how imperfect life could be, the day you married, the love of your life was supposed to be untouched, like a snow globe moment sealed from the mess of the world. That was what I thought, right? Until the second the wedding cake toppled over in front of 200 guests, splattering across the marble floor like a casualty in a silent war. No one warned me about. If you love real-life stories, chilling revenge, and dark family secrets, hit that subscribe button now. You're about to step into a world where the truth is far more terrifying than fiction. My name is Grace Miller. I'm 30 years old, a social worker in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of woman who still packs granola bars in her purse in case one of her clients is hungry, who keeps extra jackets in the back seat of her car for kids whose parents can't afford winter clothes. I am not glamorous. I am not wealthy. I am not the type of woman who normally attends charity galas, much less marries a man whose mother practically lives on morning television. But I was marrying James Carter, a neurosurgeon with gentle hands and a quiet smile. So somehow I ended up in a ballroom glowing with chandeliers, wearing a dress worth more than my monthly salary. If weddings were snow globes, then mine was a crystal orb built on a fault line. The ballroom at the Beverly Crest Hotel shimmered like a movie set. Gold-rimmed champagne flutes, white roses cascading from tall vases, a string quartet playing a soft, expensive version of Love. My side of the family, humble and modest, sat politely at their tables, slightly overwhelmed by the luxury. His side lawyers, doctors, philanthropists, looked as though they'd been born inside that exact ballroom and had never left. And then there was Linda Carter, my future mother-in-law. She wore navy silk that hugged her like confidence incarnate. Diamonds sparkled on her wrist, a gift from one of her patients she'd mentioned casually as though it weren't inappropriate. Her smile, famous from dozens of televised interviews and book covers, looked warm from afar. Up close, though, it had texture like a curtain that could be pulled aside at any moment. Linda Carter was one of the most respected psychologists in Los Angeles. A woman who built her brand on healing empathy and emotional intelligence. People adored her, patients trusted her, producers begged her for guest appearances. And there I was, marrying her only son. She loves you, James had always said. She's just intense. She treats everyone like a project. It's her way of caring. She'll get used to you. I wanted to believe him. I still wanted to believe him on the morning of our wedding. Even when Linda hugged me with a grip so firm it felt like she was measuring my bones. But everything changed at the cake. It was a 5-tier masterpiece vanilla sponge raspberry filling, white buttercream, hand-sculpted sugar flowers, a cake that cost nearly half my monthly rent. It sat on a small pedestal near the center of the ballroom, waiting for James and me to cut it together. Our first ceremonial act as husband and wife. The photographer motioned us forward. Guests raised their phones. Ryan Seacrest's stylist, whom Linda had somehow convinced to do her makeup, stood nearby, adjusting her lipstick with a tiny mirror. The string quartet shifted subtly into a hopeful melody. I grabbed James's hand, he squeezed mine. Then Linda smiled too bright, too rehearsed, and stepped toward us. "Oh, please let me help set the perfect moment," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced charm. She reached for the table. Her fingers brushed the edge of the cake's pedestal. She tilted her wrist slightly, almost elegantly, and the entire cake, 5 hours of labor, a symbol of celebration, began to slide. "No," I gasped. It happened in slow motion. The cake tilted. It quivered. Then gravity took over. It crashed onto the marble with a sickening, wet thud. Frosting splattered across my dress, my shoes, my ankles. Decorations burst like tiny white fireworks. A gasp rippled through the guests. And then, silence. Long, cold, humiliating silence. People glanced between Linda and me, unsure how to react. Maybe they were waiting for me to cry. Maybe they were waiting for Linda to soothe me. Maybe they were just waiting for permission to laugh. But Linda filled the silence first. She knelt, gracefully, theatrically, and dipped a finger into a smear of frosting. She tasted it, looked at me, then smiled with perfect comedic timing. "Chắc là ý trời, probably God's will." She said it in the accented Vietnamese I had taught her just a week earlier. I had told her stories about my mother who passed away when I was 14. I shared how Mom would say that phrase whenever something bad happened, trying to soften life's blows with faith and humor. It had been an intimate confession, one of the few moments I thought Linda truly listened. Now she used it like a punchline. The ballroom erupted with warm, indulgent laughter. Guests dabbed their eyes, charmed by her wit. Even members of the film crew, yes, she hired a film crew, chuckled as their cameras zoomed in for reaction shots. I stood frozen, not because the cake had been ruined. Cakes can be remade, moments can be salvaged. I stood frozen because of the look Linda gave me when she said those words. A look that said, "Welcome to the family. I make the rules. A little humiliation builds character. Let's see how much you can take." James put his arm around my waist, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart." She didn't mean it, but my body didn't relax because I knew she absolutely meant it. The rest of the evening felt like walking through a dream someone else designed. People congratulated us as though nothing had happened, though their eyes lingered on the buttercream stains on my dress. Waiters scrambled to clean the floor. Linda, queen of the room, continued, dazzling guests with the ease of a seasoned performer. At our sweetheart table, I tried to eat but felt the frosting drying stiff on my skirt. "I'm sorry about the cake," James said for the 15th time. His hand covered mine, warm and apologetic. Mom was just trying to help. "She pushed the table," I said quietly. "She didn't push it," he insisted. "She was adjusting the cloth." "She did it on purpose, James." He exhaled long and tired grace. "You're emotional." "It was an accident." Emotional. The words stung more than I expected. I looked across the room. Linda was holding court, animated and glowing, telling a group of guests a story while they hung on to her every word, and as if she sensed my stare, she glanced at me briefly, just for a moment, smiled and raised her champagne glass in my direction. A toast or a warning, I couldn't tell. After the wedding, after the photos, after the endless smiles, we were finally alone in the bridal suite. A beautiful room with soft lighting and a view of the city. I should have been exhausted but happy. Instead, I felt hollow. "You're worried about the cake," James said, undoing his bow tie. "Grace, it's just a cake." "It's not the cake," I whispered. "Then what?" I hesitated. The words felt too large inside my chest. "Your mom doesn't like me," James laughed softly. "She adores you. She talks about you nonstop. She talks about me like I'm one of her patients," I corrected. He frowned. "You're overthinking." Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But when I closed my eyes, I saw the cake falling over and over like a symbol of something I wasn't ready to name. And I heard Linda's voice again, "Chaklaichoy." I lay awake long after James fell asleep, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the steady tick of the clock. I tried to convince myself that I was being dramatic, sensitive, reactive words Linda used casually about women like me in her books. But deep down, a quieter truth whispered back, "This wasn't an accident. This was the opening scene, the beginning of something I couldn't yet see, but could already feel tightening like a thread around my life." And in that dark, expensive room, wearing a dress stiff with dried frosting, I made myself a silent promise. If this was God's will, then I needed to start questioning which God Linda Carter believed in, and whether I was ready to defy her. If the wedding was a performance, the honeymoon was a pause between acts. We spent 7 days in Hawaii, which sounded romantic on Instagram, but felt more like a long exhale I couldn't fully take. The resort was beautiful. The ocean was warm. The sunsets were unreal. Everything was objectively perfect. James was sweet and attentive, doing everything he could to make up for the cake incident, as if booking us a couple's massage could erase the look in his mother's eyes when she said, "Chak la I Troy." I tried to let it go. To be fair, James was trying. He didn't defend what happened, he minimized it. There's a difference. Minimizing feels softer, more reasonable. It sounds like she probably didn't realize. She didn't mean it that way. You know how she is. Soft words, sharp edges. We returned to Los Angeles with sunburned noses and a shared key to our new apartment. A modest 2-bedroom not far from the hospital where James worked, and the community center where I did intake for families in crisis. This is our real life, I told myself, standing among half-unpacked boxes. This is what matters. For a few weeks, it almost felt true. We fell into a routine. James left for the hospital before sunrise, most days returning late, smelling like soap and antiseptic. I spent my days listening to stories mothers who couldn't afford rent, teenagers afraid to go home, kids who flinched at sudden noises. I'd come home emotionally wrung out, but also strangely grounded. Their pain was real, complicated, messy. It made my own unease feel privileged, selfish even. So when Linda called one Monday evening and suggested a little emotional hygiene, I was too tired to see it for what it was. "You two should come by on Sunday," she said. "Just for a check-in. Preventive care. You know I always recommend couples therapy, even for healthy couples." I had just sunk onto the couch, kicking off my shoes. "Are we not okay?" I asked. "Oh, no, no," she said, her tone butter smooth. "You're fine. I recommend it to everyone. You know my view, the best time to work on a relationship is before things go wrong. And between us," her voice lowered conspiratorially, "you know how intense residency and hospital work can be. It would be responsible of you two to prepare." Responsible. The word hooked into my guilt like a small, gleaming hook. By the time I hung up, I'd agreed. When James came home, I told him. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "That's great. It means she cares." Linda's home office looked exactly like I imagined it would. Bookshelves lined the walls, color-coded and perfectly arranged, framed degrees from Stanford and UCLA, and places I'd only ever heard of in documentaries stretched across one wall: psychology, counseling, family therapy, photos of her on TV sets, on panels at charity events. Everything about the room said, "I am the authority. I am the one people come to when they are lost." She even had a small water fountain in the corner, a constant trickle of sound, like staged tranquility. "Come in, you two," she said warmly, standing to greet us. "I'm so glad you're taking this step. It shows maturity." We sat on a deep gray couch across from her leather chair. A small coffee table held a box of tissues, a notepad, and a sleek black pen positioned with almost surgical precision. Now she began crossing one leg over the other. "Before we start, I want to be clear. This is not formal therapy. That would be an ethical nightmare. No dual relationships. This is family guidance. A safe space to process with someone who knows you both very well." She smiled at me as she said it. Her eyes didn't quite match the warmth of her mouth. James chuckled. "Mom, I think Grace is nervous. You're going to psychoanalyze her." "Oh, sweetheart, I psychoanalyze everyone," Linda replied lightly. "It's my curse." They laughed. I tried to laugh too. She began with simple questions. "How did you two meet? What do you admire about each other? How did your families shape your idea of marriage?" They were harmless in theory, but it's never just the question that matters. It's where it leads. I told her about my mother, about the way she'd worked 2 jobs cleaning houses while learning English at night. I talked about the day my mother got sick and how the bills piled up until they swallowed our small apartment. I remembered sitting on a worn-out couch listening to my mother wheeze between coughs, whispering, "Chakla I Troy," when the eviction notice came. She had this way of making the worst things sound survivable, I said. Like there was some larger plan and we just had to walk through it. Linda nodded, eyes soft. "So you grew up believing suffering had purpose?" "I don't know if I'd say believing," I replied. It was more something she said so we wouldn't break. "And your father?" she asked. "He left when I was 12, I said. There was a bottle involved, and someone who wasn't my mother." I see, her pen scratched something across the page. "So abandonment, instability, scarcity. And yet you became a social worker." She smiled like she'd just solved a small puzzle. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting." Her gaze shifted to James. "And you, darling? You grew up with the opposite: stability, abundance, predictability. How do you think that shapes your dynamic?" James shrugged. "I guess I'm more practical, less emotional." "And Grace?" Linda prompted. I swallowed. "I feel things more. I guess I can't really turn it off." Linda tilted her head, watching me. "That must be exhausting," she said, not unkindly. "Feeling everything so deeply, carrying so much responsibility for others." "I mean, yes, sometimes." She leaned forward. "Do you ever worry that you might over-identify with pain, that you might unconsciously seek relationships where you can reproduce that pattern, help people fix them, be necessary to them?" It felt like a pop quiz I hadn't prepared for. "I don't think that's why I'm with James," I said, uneasy. He doesn't need fixing. No, of course not, she replied quickly. James is remarkably well adjusted. She smiled at him with pride. But sometimes, my dear, people with your history can feel uncomfortable in truly stable relationships. They look for instability, or they create it. My mouth went dry. Are you saying I create problems? Not intentionally, she said. Never intentionally. Trauma is sneaky. It whispers old stories into new situations. I'm just inviting you to be curious about that. Can you do that? Be curious instead of defensive. James squeezed my hand. She's just trying to help, he murmured. I nodded, even as something inside me bristled. Curious? Not defensive curious. We left an hour later with instructions to keep a feelings journal and notice patterns without judgment. Linda hugged us both at the door, her perfume a blend of jasmine and something sharp I couldn't name. You two are going to be fine, she said. This is just tuning the engine before a long road trip. I'm proud of you. On the ride home, James seemed lighter. That went well, he said. Did it? I asked. She really likes you, he insisted. You know, Mom doesn't waste her time on people she doesn't care about. That was part of the problem. The sessions continued every Sunday. They were always framed as optional, but there was an undercurrent of expectation. If we tried to skip, Linda would say something like, of course, if you don't want to invest in your marriage, that's your choice. Or, I just worry you're missing an opportunity to prevent future heartbreak. It was like being guilt-tripped by a calendar reminder. Over time, the questions sharpened. Grace. Do you notice how often you interpret neutral events as hostile? Grace? Do you see how your tone could be perceived as critical? Grace. Are you aware you just raised your voice? Sometimes I hadn't, not really. Other times, Linda would circle back to my childhood. You grew up with so much chaos, dear. It's only natural that you might unintentionally bring chaos into your adult relationships, James. Do you ever feel that way? James would shift uncomfortably. I mean, sometimes Grace reacts strongly to things I don't think are a big deal, he admitted once. Can you give an example? Linda asked gently. He thought for a moment. Like the cake at the wedding. She was really upset about it. I stared at him. I wasn't upset about the cake, I said quietly. I was upset about your mom turning it into a joke after she knocked it over. Linda's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened just a little. Grace, she said. I understand that felt humiliating, but can you see how clinging to that moment might be? Disproportionate. Fixating on perceived slights is often a trauma response. You grew up with a lot of unpredictability. Your nervous system is primed to detect threat. So there was no threat, I asked none. I'm saying your brain may register more threat than is objectively present, she replied. Just consider the possibility. There it was again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was broken. After a few weeks, I started pre-apologizing for my feelings. I know I'm probably overreacting, but I'm sure I'm being too sensitive, but Linda never told me to stop talking. She told me to doubt. And doubt, I would learn, is a slow, efficient poison. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong, it wasn't in her office. It was in my kitchen. I came home from work one Tuesday to find James sitting at the table staring at his phone. He looked off, drained in a way that had nothing to do with surgery. Long day, I asked, dropping my bag on the counter. He nodded without looking up. Mom sent me a summary of her impressions, he said eventually. I froze. Her impressions of what? Of us, the sessions. Like therapy notes. I asked, my voice flattening. He hesitated, then turned the phone toward me. On the screen, I saw a bulleted list under the subject line, Family Guidance, Observations Confidential. My name appeared 4 times. Grace exhibits patterns consistent with emotional hyperreactivity, history of childhood instability, likely shaping current narratives, tendency to externalize blame rather than self-reflect. Recommendation: James should maintain strong boundaries and avoid being pulled into Grace's emotional storms. Emotional storms. I repeated slowly, my throat tightening. I told her it sounded harsh, James said quickly. She said it's just clinical language. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. I laughed once sharply. This is about me. She wants to help, he insisted. She said this is for us, for our future kids. I stared at the words again. Maintain strong boundaries. It read less like help, more like a warning label. I set the phone down. Did she send any observations about you? I asked. James blinked. What? Her impressions about you. Any bullet points? No, I mean, there wasn't really a need. She's known me my whole life. Exactly, I said softly. He rubbed his forehead. Grace, please don't turn this into an attack. This is what I'm talking about. Mom is offering tools. You keep seeing them as weapons. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing weapons where there were only tools. Or maybe, and this thought arrived like a quiet, steady knock, tools can become weapons when placed in the wrong hands. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and mentally rewound the last few weeks. The wedding cake, the phrase "chak-la-i Troy" used as a joke, the sessions masked as guidance, the email labeling me as unstable, reactive, storm-like. I thought about the kids I worked with. How many times I'd heard parents say, "He's just dramatic. She's always overreacting. He makes things up." Sometimes those kids acted out. Sometimes they shut down. But almost always, the common denominator was that no one truly believed their experience. What happens to a person, I wondered, when the person redefining their reality is a trained psychologist with a platform and a perfect smile? And then, uninvited, another thought came. What happens when that psychologist is your mother-in-law? I turned on my side, watching James sleep. I loved him. That hadn't changed. But love, I was beginning to realize, was not armor. It was a soft, breakable thing, beautiful and utterly unequipped for war. Because that's what this was becoming. Not a misunderstanding. Not even a clash of personalities. It felt for the first time like the early stages of a psychological siege. I didn't know it yet, but Linda wasn't just studying me. She was collecting me. And soon I would find out exactly what she intended to do with her findings. The second accident happened 12 days after the email. I was sitting at my desk at the community center, finishing paperwork for a family whose landlord had illegally doubled their rent. The mother. Daniela had hugged me earlier, crying into my shoulder, because she didn't know where she and her kids would sleep next month. By the time I finished writing the report, my head ached and my stomach was a hollow knot. I reached for my lunch bag, leftovers from the night before. But the moment I opened the container, the smell hit me. Nuts. Peanut sauce. I recoiled instinctively. Heart thudding. I'm severely allergic. Not my throat gets itchy. Allergic. Call 911. Grab the EpiPen. Try not to die. Allergic. I never cook with peanuts. Never. My coworker Selena glanced over. You okay? You look pale. I didn't pack this, I said, voice tight. Maybe James made lunch for you. James did sometimes make me lunch, yes. But he knew. Everyone knew. It was literally on my medical bracelet. I checked my phone. One new message, James. Forgot to tell you. Mom dropped by the apartment this morning and brought food for both of us. Thoughtfulness level 100. Eat before it's cold. My hands went cold. Linda had been in our apartment. Linda had packed my lunch. Linda had used peanut sauce. My throat tightened, not from allergy, but fear. Selena peeked at the container. Is that peanut satay? Yeah. And she knows you're allergic? Everyone knows. Selena's expression shifted. Compassion first, then something else. Concern sharp and quick. Grace, she said carefully. That's not an accident. I snapped the lid shut and pushed the container away like it was a live grenade. I'm sure she didn't mean. The words stuck in my throat. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Because I remembered the wedding cake. I remembered the way she said, "Chak-la-i Troy," with that too perfect smile. I remembered the email, the bullet point about my emotional storms. And now lunch. Lunch that could have killed me. I threw the container straight into the outside dumpster, washed my hands twice, and texted James. Me? Did your mom pack peanuts in my lunch, James? I think so. She said it was satay. Why me? You know I'm allergic. James. Baby, relax. I'm sure she just forgot. It was early. Me? Did you remind her, James? I mean, I don't think it came up. Me? It came up at the hospital when she visited you last year. You told her, James. Grace. Please don't jump to conclusions. She was trying to help. Trying to help. Trying to help. Trying to help. The phrase kept repeating in my mind until it warped into something else entirely. The third accident happened the next week. I was late to work, rushing out the door when I tripped at the top of the stairs outside our apartment. My ankle twisted violently and I fell forward, skinning my palms and knees on the concrete. Damn it, I hissed, gripping the railing. A neighbor rushed over. Are you okay? Yes, just my pride, I said, attempting a laugh. But when I looked back, I saw the cause. Someone had tied a thin, translucent fishing line across the top step, nearly invisible unless the light hit it just right. My breath caught. My neighbor followed my gaze. Jesus! Someone trying to catch raccoons. No, I whispered. No raccoon would tie a knot like that. The line was tied deliberately carefully at the exact height of an unwatched foot. And I just knew. The next time I visited Linda's house, she greeted me with her usual theatrically warm smile. Grace, sweetheart, you're limping. What happened? I tripped. Oh dear. She touched her hand to her chest as if wounded by the idea. Clumsy girl. You must be more cautious. She said it with feigned sympathy that felt like a knife sliding across silk. And beneath that softness, I could feel that same glimmer in her eyes that she had during the cake incident. Testing. Always testing. But the biggest blow came not from Linda, but from James. He had just come home from an overnight shift. I showed him the fishing line photos. He squinted. Grace. This could be anything, kids messing around neighbors' random crap. It was tied deliberately. Maybe it was tied before and we just never noticed. We've lived here 8 months. He sighed long and deep, the sound of a man being asked to choose sides and choosing neutrality instead. You're stressed, he said softly. Your job is stressful. Our sessions with Mom are emotional. I think you're seeing patterns that aren't there. Patterns. He said it like I was hallucinating, like I was connecting dots between unrelated events. Maybe in some universe, these accidents were coincidences, but not in this one, and definitely not when the next coincidence happened at Linda's office. It was a Sunday guidance day, as Linda called it. She ushered us into her home office, dimmed the lights, lit a candle that smelled like sandalwood, and something darker, almost medicinal. Let's explore your communication styles today, she said. James, dear, would you like to begin? I listened quietly as they talked. Mostly Linda prompting James into talking about how heavy residency had become, how much emotional labor he carried, how draining it must be to support a wife with a trauma history. I gripped my knee nails, biting into my skin. When it was my turn, I began carefully. I'd like to talk about the peanut sauce, I said, and the fishing line on the stairs. Linda's face was a mask of concern. A mask I had come to distrust with every cell of my body. Oh, sweetheart, she breathed. You must be terrified. I blinked, caught off guard. Well, yes, actually. This constant fear, the hypervigilance, it must be exhausting. She leaned forward, sympathetic, concerned. A perfect portrait of compassion. But something in her eyes tightened like satisfaction. I swallowed. I'm not saying I'm imagining things. Of course not, she soothed. Perceptions are real experiences. Her voice softened into a therapist's cadence. But sometimes trauma survivors interpret random events as targeted. It's a protective instinct. James nodded slowly. Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Linda continued gently. Grace, darling, you must understand. Your brain is trained to expect danger. You grew up with instability. Your nervous system never learned true safety. I am in danger. I insisted, pulse rising. These things keep happening. Linda's smile softened even more. That smile made my skin crawl. Grace, she whispered. Peanut sauce is not an assassination attempt. My breath hitched. I never said, and people trip on stairs. That is not a sign of persecution. I know that, but do you? She murmured. Something inside me snapped tight and painful. This feels intentional, I said, my voice trembling. Sweetheart, she said delicately. Paranoia feels intentional. The room went still. The word hung in the air like smoke. Paranoia. James inhaled sharply. Mom, maybe don't use that word. I'm not diagnosing, Linda said smoothly. I'm observing. I stood. I'm not paranoid. Linda remained seated, looking up at me calmly. No one said you were a beat, you said it first. I felt the blood drain from my face. James reached for my hand. Sit down, baby, please. Let's talk it through. Talk what through, I whispered. My emotional storms, my hyperreactivity, my imaginary peanut allergy attempt. It wasn't an attempt. James snapped louder than he meant to. I flinched. He closed his eyes. I didn't mean... Grace, I don't think my mom is trying to hurt you. Linda placed a gentle hand over her heart. Grace, she said in a whisper that sounded almost victorious, I am worried about you. Something in me froze, because this was no longer guidance, no longer therapy, no longer subtle. This was a diagnosis in waiting, one that if she spoke it out loud, Unstable, paranoid, reactive, any label could become a permanent stain. And she knew it. And one day, if things escalated, she could hold up those observations like evidence. To James, to her colleagues, to the world. A perfect story. My poor son married a troubled woman. We tried everything to help her, but trauma is unpredictable. Chakla e Troy. Patterns, I could see them now fully, and Linda was stitching them together. James, I whispered, we're leaving. Grace. Now, he hesitated. Just long enough for me to see the fracture forming. Not between me and Linda, between me and him. On the drive home, James was silent, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, he said, Mom is concerned. So am I. She thinks. I cut him off. I don't care what she thinks. He exhaled harshly. You should. Something cold slid down my spine. Because in that moment I realized I was no longer fighting Linda. I was fighting the version of me she had built in James's mind, a version that didn't exist, a version she could sculpt at will, and I had no idea how to fight someone who controlled the narrative. But I knew this. The accidents weren't accidents, and whatever game she was playing, I had just stepped onto the board. The fourth accident wasn't an accident at all. It was a publication. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning at work, the kind where chaos hasn't erupted yet, and the office smells faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner. I was sorting intake forms when my coworker Selena walked in holding her phone like it was a dead rat she didn't know what to do with. Grace, she said, you need to see this. See what? She handed me the phone. On the screen was an academic journal website. The headline read, The Impact of Unresolved Childhood Trauma on Marital Stability. A clinical case study by Dr. Linda Carter. A chill crawled down my spine. No, I whispered. No, no, no. Scroll, Selena said. I did. My eyes scanned the case description section. Subject, G, 30-year-old female child of immigrant mother, father, absent, currently married to high-achieving male surgeon, JC. Presents signs of emotional hypervigilance, abandonment, anxiety, and episodic paranoid interpretations of benign events. My blood turned to ice. G, 30-year-old immigrant mother, married to surgeon JC. This was me. There was no plausible deniability, not even an attempt to disguise it. I kept reading even though my stomach twisted violently. Subject G displays escalating mistrust toward mother-in-law, misinterprets coincidental occurrences as targeted threats and struggles to regulate emotional responses. A sound escaped my throat. A strangled, breathless laugh of disbelief. Oh my God, I whispered. She wrote about me. She had turned me into a case study. Not for help, not for insight, not for healing. For her career, for her reputation, for her ongoing brand as America's therapist. Selena's voice was low and careful, Grace. She didn't even anonymize it properly. I forced myself to keep reading. My hands trembled. Subject G grew up in an environment characterized by instability and loss, which may contribute to her tendency to perceive malice in ambiguous situations. Ongoing family guidance recommends increased emotional boundaries for the spouse to avoid enmeshment with subject's trauma cycles. Enmeshment trauma cycles, paranoia. My traits. My life. My pain. Laid out like lab results for the world. No one else would know this is me, I said, voice shaking. Selena raised an eyebrow. Grace. Anyone with Google and a brain would know. She literally described your job, your husband, your mother. She paused. Your allergy. I blinked where. Selena pointed. Subject exhibits significant anxiety surrounding certain foods, despite spouse and mother-in-law providing safe, supportive care. This hyperreactivity suggests internal schema rather than external threat. I stared. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. She had written about the peanut sauce incident. She'd turned it into evidence of my instability. She's rewriting what happened, I whispered, horrified. She's turning her mistake into my pathology. Grace, Selena said gently. This isn't a mistake. This is intentional. I covered my mouth, struggling not to cry. Selena put a hand on my shoulder. What do you want to do? My first instinct was to call James. My second was to scream. My third darkest was to show up at Linda's house and burn the place to the ground. Instead, I texted James. Me, we need to talk, James, at work. What's wrong, me? It's about your mom. Something urgent. James. Can it wait? Me. No, James. Grace. Is this another incident? Me. She wrote a case study about me. James. What me? Check your email. I sent you the link, James. okay? Looking now. 3 minutes of silence. Then, James, this isn't about you. Me, are you kidding me? James, it's anonymized. Me, it's not James. Grace, honey subject, G could be anyone. Me, anyone married to a neurosurgeon named J.C. James. It's just professional writing. Me, professional, she calls me paranoid. James. She didn't say that exactly. Me, she implied it. James. Grace, please breathe. You're spiraling. I stopped reading because I realized something important, something terrifying. He didn't need to read the article to believe her. He had already been primed. Week after week of guidance, of little comments, of phrases like emotional storms and hypervigilance and trauma patterns. Linda hadn't just studied me. She had groomed James into seeing me through her lens. Even now, reading evidence, he couldn't see the truth. It wasn't that he didn't trust me. It was that he trusted her more. That night, I sat on the couch with the printed article in my lap. I had highlighted every sentence that referenced me. There were 34 pieces of my life twisted into pathology. When James walked in, he looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally, like he'd been fighting a battle I wasn't invited to. Grace, he sighed. I spoke with Mom. And I asked. She said, he hesitated. She said you might misinterpret the study because of its clinical language. I stared at him. She said I'd misinterpret it. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. She didn't mean harm. She said you inspired the study, but it's not about you. She used my exact biography. It's coincidence. She quoted our therapy sessions. It's generalized. She mentioned the peanut sauce. He paused. Lots of people have allergies. My voice cracked. James, do you hear yourself? He closed his eyes as if pained. Grace, please stop. You're letting your childhood trauma shape how you see everything. My breath hitched. There it was, her words, coming out of his mouth, like he had swallowed her whole. You sound like her, I whispered. I'm trying to help you, he snapped. No, I said, you're trying to fix me. Silence filled the room, thick, crushing. Finally, I spoke softly. James, she violated my privacy. She violated ethics, and she's weaponizing her psychology degree against me. James shook his head, eyes pleading. She loves you, Grace. She's worried about you. She's destroying me. She's protecting our marriage. I laughed, a broken, humorless sound, protecting it from what I demanded from me. He didn't answer. His silence was enough. The next day, something in me shifted. Something subtle but irreversible. I printed 3 copies of Linda's case study. I placed them in a folder. Then I walked to a small therapy clinic 4 blocks from the community center. Not Linda's office, not even a referral from her. Someone new, independent, neutral. Her name was Dr. Simone Patel. A calm woman with warm brown eyes and no patience for bullshit. She listened as I recounted everything from the wedding cake to the therapy sessions to the peanut sauce to the article. She didn't interrupt. She didn't take notes. She simply listened. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly. Grace, she said, what you're describing is not therapy. It's manipulation wrapped in therapeutic language. My throat tightened. So I'm not imagining it. No, she said firmly. You are not. This is emotional abuse. And because she is a psychologist, it is almost certainly a violation of professional ethics. I covered my face with my hands. Tears burned behind my eyelids. Dr. Patel continued gently. Your mother-in-law is positioning herself as the only expert in your relationship. She is undermining you, reframing your reality, and doing it with a smile. I nodded, swallowing hard. She has control over James, Dr. Patel added. That is why he cannot see it. So what do? I whispered. Dr. Patel's voice softened. You document everything, every session, every email, every incident. Because if this continues, Grace, you will need evidence. Evidence for what I asked, voice trembling. Her answer came quietly but with devastating clarity. For protection. That night I began recording our Sunday sessions. Quietly, discreetly. A tiny recorder in my coat pocket. I wasn't trying to catch Linda, I was trying to save myself. Because for the first time I understood the truth. Linda wasn't preparing for our marriage. She was preparing for our marriage to fail. And when it did, when she had enough notes, enough case studies, enough evidence, she could easily frame me as unstable, untrustworthy, unwell. She was building her defense, her narrative, her future book. And I was the clinical specimen inside her pretty glass jar. But she underestimated one thing. Specimens can escape. And this one had just realized she needed to start fighting back. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are countless real-life betrayals, twists, and revenge stories waiting for you in the next episodes. Dr. Patel's words echoed in my head for days. You will need evidence. It became a mantra, a warning, a prophecy. By the time Linda's book launch rolled around, I had collected more than enough. Audio recordings from 8 guidance sessions, emails where she described me as unstable, the case study that revealed my personal history, a video from the wedding cake incident where she clearly nudged the table, a photo of the fishing line tied at the top of our stairs, a screenshot of James asking if I was spiraling again, a phrase straight from her mouth. But evidence wasn't enough. Not with someone like Linda Carter. Linda didn't just shape James's perception of me, she shaped the public's perception of herself. She lived in an armor made of credibility and charisma. So if I was going to expose her, I needed one thing: a stage as public as hers. And Linda provided it. Her book launch was held at the Crescent Plaza Hotel, one of those glossy places with valets who bow and fountains that look like they were carved by Renaissance angels. The event doubled as a charity gala. Mental health advocacy, of course. Because Linda never missed a chance to blend compassion with publicity. I wore a simple black dress and kept my hair loose. Soft. Unthreatening. Nothing for her to weaponize. James walked beside me. Tense. He had been distant all week, retreating behind a fog of devotion to his mother that I couldn't penetrate. "Promise me you'll be polite tonight," he murmured. I didn't answer. He sighed. "Grace, please, let's just get through the night," I said quietly. He nodded, relieved. If only he knew. Linda looked radiant on stage. White dress, pearl earrings, a soft pink blazer that made her look like the patron saint of emotional well-being. Her book cover, Letting Go, Accepting God's Will in Relationships, was displayed on posters around the room, her signature smile beaming from every corner. She spotted me in the crowd and lit up like a lighthouse. "Grace." "Sweetheart, come here," she called. The people around us turned. Cameras followed me. I stepped closer, wearing the calmest expression I could muster. "You look lovely," she said, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was sharp and sweet, like poison wrapped in flowers. "Are you ready for the big night?" "Absolutely," I said. "I've been looking forward to it." She placed her hands on my arms, giving me a look that was half affection, half warning. "Let's try to keep emotions steady tonight," she murmured in a voice only I could hear. "No dramatics. No storms." Her coded language, her control. I smiled, of course. Inside, my pulse was steady, all determined. Tonight wasn't about emotion, it was about truth. The event began with interviews. Reporters circled her like moths orbiting a beautiful flame. "Dr. Carter, what inspired this book?" "Dr. Carter, how do you maintain such empathy?" "Dr. Carter, tell us about the case study you included." "Fascinating material." Linda's voice floated through the room, smooth as satin. "Oh, that case is very dear to me," she said. "A young woman who struggled deeply in her marriage due to childhood trauma. Such a good heart, but so reactive and fear-driven. It wasn't her fault, of course. Trauma rewires the brain." My hands curled into fists. I watched James swallow hard. Even he knew this was too specific. But Linda wasn't done. She believed her mother-in-law was causing accidents. She added, laughing softly, when in fact, they were just coincidences. "It's a wonderful example of how fear distorts perception." My jaw tightened. Fear distorts perception. That was her thesis, her shield, her weapon, and she wielded it with pride. When it was time for the Q&A session, I stood near the back of the room, heart pounding in a slow, controlled rhythm. A woman in a red dress stood at the microphone, first asking about attachment styles. Then a man asked about conflict resolution. Then it was my turn. I walked toward the mic. James froze. Linda's smile stiffened. "Hello," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Grace." A murmur ran through the crowd. People turned. Phones lifted, cameras zoomed in. Linda beamed brightly, though her eyes screamed, "Don't you dare!" "What is your question, dear?" she asked sweetly. "My question," I said, "is about your case study." The room rustled electric. Linda laughed lightly. "Of course, what would you like to know?" "I'd like to know how you justify publishing private details about your daughter-in-law without her consent." Dead silence. Someone gasped. Linda's smile wavered just for a second. "Grace." "Sweetheart, you misunderstand." I interrupted. Did I misunderstand the part where you described my mother, my job, my trauma history, and my husband's initials? Cameras turned. The tension cracked open like thunder. Grace, she said calmly, but her eyes were steel. This is not the time. Oh, I think it is, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out my folder. I brought copies, I continued, highlighted for convenience. There were chuckles in the crowd. Nervous, astonished, growing. Linda's voice sharpened. Grace, you're making a scene. No, I said, I'm revealing one. I placed the highlighted pages on the podium where everyone could see. Dr. Carter claims her case study is anonymous, but anyone with internet access can identify me. Cameras flashed. Linda opened her mouth, but I pressed on, voice clear, amplified. She wrote that I was paranoid, that I created chaos, that I misinterpreted benign events. I looked directly at her. So let's talk about those benign events, shall we? A ripple of movement. The crowd leaned in. I took out the photo of the fishing line. This was tied across my stairs. I raised it. Benign. Then the screenshot from James's text. Mom dropped off lunch for you, sauté. I held up the doctor's statement confirming my peanut allergy. She packed peanuts in my food. A beat benign. A reporter muttered, holy shit. I lifted another page, an email of hers to James, advising him to create emotional distance and manage me. She told my husband I was unstable. I looked at James, and he believed her. Finally, I reached for the last piece, my phone. And here I said, pressing play is a recording of Dr. Carter during our family guidance sessions. Linda lunged forward. Stop! But the audio filled the ballroom. Linda's voice. If this marriage fails, James, it won't be your fault. Trauma like hers is unpredictable. The crowd erupted, gasped,